now that there is a race of quick commerce happening, is fundamentally more options to consumers, which will then probably change the habit. And then it will get more adoption. When it has more adoption, then there is a larger market, and then the market dynamics sort of decide who wins or loses. Execution, I think some of you mentioned, important. So therefore, whether you're a first mover or a follower, if as an organization you're not looking at opportunity or I say the horizon gazing, right? If you're spotted an opportunity, a lot of other conditions come in, whether you're deciding to go after the opportunity. Financially, does it make sense? Is it too far from your core business, etc. But having decided, if you're not somebody who's grazing the horizon, you're going to get disrupted very soon. And any business, today's world, consumer to B2B to B2C, everybody can get disrupted in next 2 years, right? So in my mind, it is lot important, not totally important whether you're a first mover or you're a follower. What happens after you move? Do you have a lead, and then what do you do? Because large companies get disrupted because somebody comes and changes the nature of the game, right? And there are a lot of examples across. I work in a fashion e-commerce space, so we have been talking about fast fashion for a very long period of time. Suddenly somebody comes and disrupts on the axis of value and fashion, and you create a player like Zudio, right? Which is at a core product level not very different, but as a proposition lot very different, right? So it depends on a lot of factors, I guess.
So the discussion is about who has an edge, the first mover or the fast follower, who wins the game or stays in the game.
Majorly depends on the industry. So I belong from a space technology background, and we work on satellite hardware basically. So there the cycles are much longer. So you're talking about initial adopters being the space agencies or the defense primes, the bigger corporates and all that there. So the cycle of that is usually much larger. Now if someone has really made a core solution that is very disruptive, often there's also a lot of inhibition for someone else to adopt it in the ecosystem. So but if you are at the tipping point and you have really innovated the solution and you are continuously pushing that and win some contracts, then I would say both have almost an equal edge if the fast follower is also looking at it particularly. So that's, I think, where majorly it's very industry specific. So mostly deep tech industries, manufacturing hardware will have a lot of inhibitions in terms of, let's say, the business customers to adopt it. So there it will be some challenges.
Organically, the discussion has transitioned into the kind of factors that determine who is having it. Okay, so you've mentioned regarding the role of timing, as in, is the market ready for this, or are the companies able to create that demand or make the customers feel the need? That is where the role of timing comes into place. And many of you have mentioned about the specificity or industry specific sectors that we are talking into in terms of whether it is manufacturing, so who can have a higher hand in it. Okay, what other factors can you think about if that works in figuring out this maze? Okay, can you please reflect on that?
I think I'll borrow from Sandeep. It's a very important point. Being in the space of OB and OD, culture plays a very determining factor, right? I mean, ultimately, whether it is technology or fashion or space, it's people who are going to do it. So the appetite and the ecosystem that you create for risk taking becomes a very value. It is a value proposition for the company and for employees. So if you join a startup because you want to really be in that space and experience the first mover fabric, but you enter and then discover that risk is always punished, then everything is doomed, right? So I think it is also about the culture, the ecosystem, the leadership that kind of is able to drive it with a long-term vision, and also people who are willing to contribute and explore. Invariably, I mean, coming from a neuroscience background, one another thing is we're not naturally open to innovation. It's not that it comes naturally to us unless you're trained, and that's why children are more creative, right? I mean, you're trained, you give them jigsaw puzzles, you teach them so many things, but over a period of time, I think as we evolve, we forget the very nature and concept of innovation or concept of creativity. So I think it is a combination of a culture of creativity, a culture of leadership, a culture of providing people to take risks, and a culture of encouraging people who fail. It's talked about, it's called out, but in the truest sense in organizations, I've rarely come across organizations who've promoted a person who started something but still failed.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is that absolutely right. Culture is the bedrock, right? And any sector, we talked about sector industries, every sector you can clearly distinguish. These are the people who have the DNA, they will move first. These are the people who will follow fast. In every sector, you can clearly see the dynamics at play. So culture and the organizational DNA is one factor. The other factor, and I remember very nice analogy, you have rabbits and you have elephants. Rabbits are your first early movers, right? They will change direction, they see a tree, they will deviate. So size of the organization is a very important factor in that. And it also relates to some degree of cultural thing. So although I work in large company and I work in innovation space, I know that if my team size starts to become big, I will lose agility and maneuverability to navigate a complex, innovative space. I am designed as a corporate or as an organization to go in a straight line. Because my size is so big, but I have the muscle power to remove the roadblocks from my path. If I'm big enough, I have an elephant, I can remove the roadblock from my path. And what I meant to say here was that in terms of my DNA, either I have an agility built into me or I have the muscle power built into me. And that will determine which route I am more suited to take. And typically, other factor that comes into play for me is how much of ecosystem I have. Because innovation today is not a individualistic play. You have to take your ecosystem along if you really want to make a difference. And the more networks I have, more suppliers I have, more partners I have, I will be in a better position to be able to come in at a later stage and still disrupt the market. So a lot of these are genetic elements that I think you are referring to, and that's all brings into the culture and to the DNA and genetics of my organization, which will determine whether I'll be successful as an early mover or will I be more successful as a fast follower.
I think obviously from an organization perspective, that's the most fundamental thing. But also getting a read on the cultural shifts in the population and the narrative changes and the speed at which that happens. Like for example, at least growing up, my generation was all very sensitive to pricing. The current Gen Z doesn't give a crap about pricing. So would a quick commerce be successful 10 years ago? I doubt it. Today you can go and say I will give you a television. You order at 12 o'clock in the midnight and you will get your television 2 a.m. There are takers for that. It happens. It was officially launched. But whether would that have been successful 10 years ago, we don't know. Today, in UP they invested 7,500 crores and they are generating whatever 20-30 billion dollars. At least they're claiming that they're generating 20-30 billion dollars in tourism. And every third person, at least I know, has themselves or somebody in the family visiting, Kumbh Mela right now. Like, I would believe that 30-40 crore people in the country of 140 have actually gone in the last month and a half, right? We saw that with the Trump elections, everything flipped, overnight. So I think the cultural shifts that are happening, whether it be I don't know how many people are actually making for Gen Z. Their habits, the way they are going to shape the markets is fundamentally going to be very different than, you know, what we have been used to. So the people that, you know, like us who went through 20, 25 years building a certain amount of capability, I don't think that is going to be relevant in the way things are going to happen in the next 10 years, such as, you know, AI has come. Today there are apps where you can just give a prompt and make an application. So that makes a whole bunch of people redundant. And it's a whole new set of people that can come in and just talk and, you know, be very detailed about the instructions that they're giving. They can be much better than the experts that have spent 30 years or 20 years, you know, in those kind of fields. So I think the cultural shifts, the technology shifts, and who's sort of driving the, you know, the power of the narrative towards a certain manner, I think those things one has to watch and be very, very quick to respond to that. And for that, you know, obviously you need a culture that, you know.
Let me bring a couple of other elements. I think one is, you know, if you are going to disrupt the market, if you create a new category, how big is your dream, right? How audacious is it? So you got to think about that, right? I want to launch a rocket which comes back and lands back, right? So you have to have audacity in your dreams. And second thing is how are you able to articulate that dream? Because you got to take people along, right? You need your first set of employees, you need your first set of investors, you need people to back you. You need the world to back you. And part of that is so yes, you should understand the cultural shifts that are happening, and they have to be relevant, contextual to what's happening today, but also very important in terms of articulation. And the bigger the dream, the more people chase it, right? Like audacious dreams is what people, because it's aspirational, right? So people love to sort of aspire for those sorts of things is sort of how I look at it. Yeah.